The Declaration of Independence, the story behind America's freedom. What if I told you that the document that birthed a nation was almost never written at all? That the man who penned history's most revolutionary words nearly refused the task? And that America's founding fathers came dangerously close to backing down from their treasonous gamble at the last possible moment? The story of the Declaration of Independence isn't just about pretty words on parchment. It's a tale of political intrigue, personal vendettas, and a group of men who literally bet their lives on an idea that most of the world considered madness. The reluctant revolutionary picture this. It's June 1776, and the Continental Congress has just made the most audacious decision in human history to formally break away from the British Empire. But there's a problem. Someone needs to write the document that will either launch a new nation or serve as evidence in their treason trials. The Committee of Five, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman sits in a sweltering Philadelphia room, and nobody wants the job. Adams, the fiery orator from Massachusetts, seems the obvious choice, but he's made too many enemies with his passionate speeches. Franklin, the brilliant polymath, is battling gout and struggling with his health. The task falls to the youngest member of the committee, 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson, relatively unknown planter from Virginia. Who'd he rather be home designing his mansion at Monticello than crafting revolutionary manifestos? Jefferson accepted the assignment reluctantly, sequestering himself in a second-floor room at Market and 7th Streets. Working at a portable writing desk of his own design, he began crafting what would become the most consequential document in modern history. But here's what most people don't know. Jefferson didn't write the Declaration in isolation. He borrowed heavily from his own earlier work on the Virginia Constitution, lifted entire passages from George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, and drew inspiration from John Locke's treatises on government. The Declaration wasn't born from divine inspiration. It was a masterful act of intellectual synthesis under crushing pressure. The hidden drama behind closed doors as Jefferson labored over his draft, the Continental Congress erupted in chaos. The delegates were unified revolutionaries marching boldly toward independence. They were terrified men acutely aware that they were signing their own death warrants. British law was crystal clear. Rebellion against the crown carried the penalty of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. The gruesome execution method involved being dragged behind horses, hanged until nearly dead, disemboweled while still alive, beheaded, and cut into quarters for public display. John Hancock, the wealthy Boston merchant who would become famous for his oversized signature, allegedly quipped that they must hang together, or, most assuredly, we shall all hang separately. But behind the bravado lay genuine terror. Several delegates actually fled Philadelphia rather than face the vote. Others sent desperate letters to their wives, preparing for the worst. The debates were vicious. John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, once called the penman of the Revolution for his earlier protests against British policies, now argued passionately against independence. He believed reconciliation was still possible, and that declaring independence would invite catastrophic retaliation. In one heated exchange, he accused the independence faction of brave talk and idle words, while real families would suffer the consequences of their idealism. Meanwhile, Caesar Rodney, the Delaware delegate, was literally dying of cancer. His face partially eaten away by the disease he hid behind a green silk scarf. When Delaware's delegation deadlocked on independence, Rodney rode 80 miles through a thunderstorm on the night of July 1st, arriving just in time to cast the tie-breaking vote for his colony. His dramatic midnight ride remains one of the most underappreciated heroic acts in American history. The document that almost wasn't, but here's where the story takes its most dramatic turn. The declaration that emerged from Jefferson's room was the one that made history. His original draft contained a blistering attack on slavery, calling it a cruel war against human nature itself, and blaming King George III for forcing the institution upon the colonies. This passage was longer and more passionate than the famous grievances we know today. Jefferson, despite being a slaveholder himself, genuinely believed independence should mean freedom for all. The South Carolina and Georgia delegates threatened to walk out entirely if the anti-slavery language remained. Even some northern delegates worried it was too radical, a devastating compromise that would haunt the nation for nearly a century, The slavery passage was cut entirely. Jefferson later called it the most painful edit of his life. And the deletion represented the new nation's original sin, declaring that all men were created equal while simultaneously accepting human bondage. The editing process was brutal. The Congress slashed nearly a quarter of Jefferson's original text, removing flowery language and philosophical flourishes in favor of crisp, legalistic prose. Jefferson sat silently, wincing at each deletion, while Franklin supposedly tried to comfort him with the story of a hat maker whose sign was edited into meaninglessness by helpful neighbors. The irony is delicious. The document we revere today for its eloquence was actually the result of committee editing that its author considered butchery. The moment that changed everything, on July 4, 1776, as the final version came to a vote, the tension in the Pennsylvania State House was suffocating. The windows were closed despite the heat to prevent British spies from overhearing the proceedings. Flies swarmed in from nearby stables, making the delegates miserable as they debated treason. Some historians suggest the insects actually hastened the vote everyone wanted to escape the buzzing torment. When the final tally was announced, 12 colonies in favor, none opposed. With New York abstaining, the silence was deafening. No one cheered, no bells rang. The delegates understood they had just made themselves the most wanted men in the British Empire. John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail that July 4th should be celebrated with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations. But on that sweltering afternoon, the mood was more funeral than festival. The physical signing ceremony we imagined never happened. Most delegates signed weeks later, and some didn't add their names until autumn. The document that announced America's birth was kept secret for days, while copies were rushed to colonial capitals and military commanders. George Washington had it read to his troops in New York, hoping to inspire soldiers who were facing the world's most powerful military force with little more than muskets and determination. The legacy that lives, what makes the Declaration truly extraordinary, isn't just what it said, but what it unleashed. Jefferson's words about equality and natural rights became a time bomb buried in the foundation of American society. Though the founders limited their own interpretation of all men are created equal, subsequent generations would use those same words to expand freedom's reach. Frederick Douglass wielded them against slavery. Susan B. Anthony invoked them for women's suffrage. Martin Luther King Jr. made them the moral foundation of civil rights. The document that began as a desperate justification for rebellion became humanity's most powerful statement of human dignity and self-governance. Kings and emperors across Europe read Jefferson's words with growing alarm, recognizing that the ideas contained within threatened the entire concept of divine monarchy. The Declaration didn't just announce American independence, it declared war on the ancient notion that some humans were born to rule others. Today, as we face our own political divisions and constitutional crises, the Declaration reminds us that democracy was never meant to be easy or comfortable. It was born from the radical belief that ordinary people could govern themselves, a notion that seemed as impossible in 1776 as it sometimes feels today. The founders didn't hand us a perfect union. They gave us the tools to keep building one, word by agonizing word, generation by generation. The greatest mystery isn't how a group of colonial rebels defeated the British Empire, it's how a hastily written political document became the most enduring statement of human freedom ever penned. Perhaps that's the real magic of the Declaration. It wasn't written by gods or kings, but by flawed, frightened, brilliant human beings who decided that some ideas were worth risking everything to defend.